101. Time to start. All right. Well, it's really our pleasure today to welcome John Marsh, who's a congregant. So we're so pleased that he can join us. Today we're going to learn about an elite group of women who were the first to fly military planes during the early days of World War II. And we're going to hear firsthand from John, who is actually a son of one of these pilots. So we are going to turn it over to you, John, and with much gratitude.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me come in and talk to you. This is something that's dear to my heart, and it gives me an opportunity to tell you more about it. How many of you heard of the WASP? Wow, I'm glad to see that. A lot of people have never heard of them. Anyhow, I'm John Marsh. I've been a pilot for over 50 years. My mother was a WASP. I'm on the board of the WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. That's where they trained. So that's who I am. This next slide are the two ladies that really were instrumental in starting the WASP program. They felt like there was such a shortage. Oh, well, we skipped over one. Sorry about that. So this was Jackie Cochran and Nancy Love. They were very instrumental in pitching the idea of using women to fly airplanes in World War II. There was a shortage of pilots, and so it was their idea, let's use these women. They were underutilized. So that's how it all got started. They were already using women in Britain. They had an auxiliary air transport auxiliary, and they were called the Atta Girls, so they were a little ahead of us. Britain was already into the war before we were, and there was already a shortage of pilots. So they used the ladies to ferry planes, et cetera, to free the men up for combat. But not everybody was happy to see women flying. Here's a quote from the Aeroplane magazine. "The menace is the woman who thinks that she ought to be flying a high-speed bomber when she really not has the intelligence to scrub the floor of a hospital properly." Yeah, that went over well, obviously. I've got to tell you a story, true story. I should have started out with this. There were a couple WASP trainees in a room. A male instructor walked in and looked around. He says, "I didn't realize I was going to have to teach a bunch of damn women to fly." Yeah, and the one WASP said to her friend, she says, "I'll get even with that SOB if it's the last thing I ever do." But she did. She married him. True story. So this is how it got started. Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army, authorized the creation of the program. Eleanor Roosevelt felt this was a woman pilot, something that should be used, and let's use it. This started in the summer of 1942. We had the same severe pilot shortage that Britain had, and the U.S. was ready now to start taking on women. This is Fifinella. This is the WASP mascot. This mascot was designed by Walt Disney, and this is their little gremlin. Whenever there was an issue with the airplane, they blamed it on the gremlin. You can see the patch the WASP is wearing on her jacket. That's a Fifinella. So that's probably the most common image for the WASP. I've got one on my shirt. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. The WASP applicants had to be between the ages of 21 and 35. They had to be American citizens. They had to have 200 flying hours and be a licensed pilot. They had to pass an Army physical and pass a written test. So this was pretty strict. Not a lot of women back then were pilots, and to try to get women with 200 flying hours, as it got further and further into the program, they reduced that somewhat. But they were very well trained when they came in already. This wasn't like some of the male programs where you start from scratch learning to fly. Most of them already had licenses. There was 25,000 applicants. Only 1,830 were accepted, and of those, only 1,074 graduated. So it's really a small program. That's a handful of WASP. That's just much like the Tuskegee Airmen. They had about the same number of Tuskegee Airmen flying, so they Back then, hey, women can't fly, blacks can't fly, and they all proved that they could, and they did a wonderful job for our country. This goes over some of the same things. They lost 38 of the ladies died in service to their country. And that was another shame. One of the WASPs, when they died, they had no benefits. They were civilians. So the WASP had to take up a collection to send the body home. But they flew 77 different aircraft. They flew everything the military had, and they flew 66 million miles, and their safety record was just as good as the men. Here's a little bit about discrimination. The men were to be paid $380 a month. A woman would be paid $250. Isn't that nice? The men needed only 200 flying hours to be hired. The women 500 initially. The men did not need a high school diploma. So this is where they trained. They trained in Sweetwater, Texas. There's a WASP museum today in Sweetwater, Texas, where they trained. I'm on the board of that museum, and it's really a beautiful museum. It's just, you wouldn't expect it. It's out in the middle of West Texas, and so it's not really a destination. It's not like being in a big city where you have a lot of traffic. So if you ever get to Sweetwater, stop and see the museum. They were housed in a barracks. You can see the barracks there in the picture on the left. They only had 2 sinks and 2 commodes, and they had every morning to get up and get moving and trying to get ready for revelry. So imagine the mayhem to get 6 a.m. reveille to try to get ready. This is a graduation certificate for one of the WASP. Passed their instrument test. Oh, these were their suits. When they first started this, they had no uniforms. They were actually given men's hand-me-down coveralls. So you can see they were large and extra large, and rubber bands were in short supply. They'd rolled the feet up and the sleeves. I always felt it was dangerous. You get your arm caught on a control or something. You just don't want to get caught in there. There's a picture there in the middle of 2 WASP in one uniform, just having fun with it. They called them zoot suits, and I'm not sure how that name came about, but they had to pay for their own uniforms. They trained in cold weather. Oh, you look at the lady there on the left. They trained in Stearman. That's an open cockpit biplane, and it's cold in Texas. There's snow in the winter, so and the planes, a lot of these planes didn't have a lot of room. So if you had to fly somewhere to try to get that big bag in there, it was difficult. But this would be like driving a motorcycle in the winter months. I mean, you're just out in the wind. But this is where they had their bases. They were all over the country. They were all assigned to various bases. This was typical of their training day. A long day. They started at 6 a.m., went till 10 p.m. They did 4 hours of flying, 4 hours of ground school. They had an hour of exercise and an hour of marching. But they all helped each other. None of them wanted to see their friends wash out. If a WASP washed out, she would be gone at the end of the day. They'd come back to barracks, she was just gone. So they didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and nobody wanted to wash out. This is their primary trainer. This is a Stearman. This plane actually came into our hometown in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and was giving rides to World War II veterans. And I thought, just a nice picture, but this is what they trained in. It's open cockpit. The instructor sat in the back, the pilot the student sat in the front. And if you notice, these are tail draggers, meaning the airplane, the tail wheel in the back, that's how most of the older planes were built. Today they have a tricycle gear, but if you notice, you can't see over the nose. So they're taxiing down the runway without being able to see where they're going. So the planes would have to swerve like this to be able to see left to right to see what's ahead of them. This is called an AT-6. The AT stands for Advanced Trainer. And that's one of the things I always felt the military did right. If AT is Advanced Trainer, a B stands for a bomber, and F is a fighter. So it's pretty easy to tell when you hear a B-17, that was a bomber. But this was the first plane that they flew with retractable landing gear, and it had 600 horsepower, and the ladies loved to fly it. It was aerobatic, and it's just a pleasure to fly. So all the WASPs trained in this plane, and this was a lot of their favorite airplanes. This is a twin-engine plane that they trained in. They call it the bamboo bomber. The fuselage was made of wood. Back in World War II, they were shortage of metals, so there's only 5 of these still flying, and this plane is actually at the WASP Museum. They fly this plane to air shows like Oshkosh, and it's always a hit because there's so few. Stop me if you have any questions. Don't wait to the end, just put a hand up. This is the Douglas Dauntless dive bomber. This is the plane that won the Battle of Midway for us. It sunk 4 Japanese carriers. This was my mother's favorite plane to fly, and it's hard for me to think of my mother flying a dive bomber, but if you look at the picture on the right, those are dive flaps. They put these flaps out and enables the plane to come down on a steep dive without picking up speed. So a lot of technology went into these. If you look at that plane, the fellow in the back had a machine gun. You obviously had to be careful you didn't shoot the tail off if you're swinging that thing back and forth. This was graduation day for the WASP. You can see their wings up in the top right. That was something they were all very proud, and one of those things they felt they earned it. I have a set of WASP wings here if anybody'd like to see it after the show. But they look pretty sharp. This is one of their assignments. One of the things they did was ferrying planes. This was one of their important missions. The planes, for instance, the P-51 fighters were built out on the West Coast in California. The WASP would fly those to the East Coast where they would then be shipped to England. They were towing targets, and that's another slide coming up, but they actually pull a sleeve, and people would shoot at the sleeve, and they'd put bullets in that were colored, and then they could look at the sleeve later to see did the blue bullet hit it, did the red bullet hit it, and that's how they knew how accurate they were. But some of the shells actually hit the airplanes, so I wouldn't want to be in an airplane with somebody shooting at me, but they did it. The WASP did it all. This is Libby Gardner in that plane. I always liked that picture. It's just such an iconic picture. She was flying a B-26.
John, just a question. Why did they call that one the Widowmaker?
Well, they didn't have wing struts, so they were prone. They weren't as safe as some of the other planes. And I'll show you a couple pictures later. The B-17 and the B-24, they were brought into production for the war, and they weren't tested as well as they should be. And so the first B-17 that came out, the Boeing test pilot was killed in it. And they put gust locks on these controls so the winds don't beat up the controls. Well, the test pilot took off without removing the gust locks, and then he couldn't control the plane. But they also had a problem with the engines overheating. And so, that was between the engines overheating and being a new plane, that the men were afraid of it. They also called the B-17 a Widowmaker. But there's a couple pictures coming up later. I'll show you a little more about the B-17s. This Florine Watson was ferrying a P-51. To me, this was one of the prettiest planes in World War II. They still use these today in air races. Here's what I was talking about, towing the targets. You can see how close that sleeve is to the airplane. They would shoot at that sleeve from the ground or from another airplane, and certainly I wouldn't want to be in that plane towing a target. Here's the picture. This is probably the most iconic picture of the WASP, the picture on the left. They trained women to fly this B-17 after the Boeing test pilot was killed, and the men were afraid to fly it. So they'd have this plane land, and the guys on the ground say, I want to meet the pilots that are flying this. Well, when the women got out, it's, come on, guys, if they can fly it, you can do it. Let's shame the men into doing this. So this was, if you notice on the nose of the plane, it says pistol packing mama. And the reason for that, the plane had a Nordson bomb sight. That was really top secret back then. And the ladies all carried sidearms to protect that bomb sight. And the B-29 was much the same thing. It was brought into production quick, and they just didn't test these planes like they would today. They wanted to get them into war and get them to be their part. So the WASPs were civilians. They were going to be militarized. When they joined, it was a civilian organization, and they were promised later, we'll get you into the military. Well, 38 women lost their lives when they were designated as civilians. So the burial was at the expense of their families or their classmates. There were no gold stars allowed in the parents' windows and no American flags. So people put them up there anyhow. I mean, if your daughter's serving as a WASP, you're proud of that. You'd want to put a flag in the window or put a star in the window. But that's where we were back then. WASP trainee Shirley Slade, Life magazine came into Sweetwater to do a story about the WASP. And they spent a week there looking for pictures just to put something on the cover of the magazine. And as he was leaving, the photographer saw her sitting on the tail of this airplane and snapped the picture, and that became the cover of Life magazine in 1943. This is today. The lady on the left is Lynn Yonley. She took pictures when she was in the WASP program and saved some of the pictures. They weren't supposed to do that, but, you know, it's nice that she did. The picture on the right just shows that the ladies of today flying a jet, but they've come a long way. You know, the ladies are flying in combat today and doing their part. This is Ann Baumgartner. She was the first woman to fly a jet. She was also a WASP. Here we go. The WASP had no insurance. They got $250 a month to fly the most dangerous and heavy planes. They had to pay their own board. They had to buy their own uniforms. No benefits at all. So it was kind of sad. Now, just on a side note, some of these WASPs weren't able to drive a car. You know, if somebody'd ask them, can you move that car or can you move that truck? No, I don't know how to do that. Here they are flying a military plane, and what's more complicated? So there was 1,100 women roughly that flew 77 types of aircraft, 60 million miles, but again, 38 of them lost their lives for their country. The last class, and they were disbanded in December 44. This program only lasted about a year and a half. But the General Hap Arnold said to them, I salute you and all the WASP. We're the AAF. We're proud of you and never forget our debt to you. So they did get some recognition. They would like to have military benefits after the war, and they were tried to do that. The House bill to give the WASP military status was defeated. This meant the women had no GI benefits, and it was sad. It took them a long time. Many years later, they were made veterans, so they were then able to be going to a veterans hospital and so forth. This, again, December 44, and there was no fanfare. They just decided. The men were coming back. A lot of them had experience as pilots, and they were coming back, and the war was still going on. They were told they might have to go in to be service on the ground, to be infantry, and so they lobbied. They didn't want to do that, and they felt the WASP were unnecessary. So ultimately, they shut the WASP program down. But the WASP, wherever they were, they just had to find their own way home. If they were in California when they shut down, hey, you're on your own. Find a way home, which to me was sad. So here they are heading home. There was no ceremony at all. Very few of them got pilot jobs after the war. Nobody wanted to hire female pilots back then. Quick story, one of the WASPs that I knew, she got a job as a flight attendant on the DC-3. And she had more experience than either the pilot or the co-pilot flying that plane. And once they got up to altitude, the pilot said, would you like to fly the plane? She said, sure. Well, then the pilot and co-pilot walked back through the cabin, and they said, who's flying the plane? Well, we let the flight attendant fly it. So you couldn't do that today. And this is where it gets personal for me. This is 1976. The military announced they had their first women to fly military aircraft. Well, when the WASP heard that, they say, "This time to set the record straight." Their records were sealed for 30 years. Nobody had heard of them. And I'm not sure why that was. People said maybe they didn't want to feel that we needed women for our adversaries to know that we're using women, or that they didn't want people to think their mother or wife was flying for the military. Who knows? But anyhow. And finally, they got recognition. 1975, Bruce Arnold was the son of Hap Arnold, began lobbying for the WASP to be recognized as veterans. They were eventually successful in 1977 with the support of Senator and former ferry pilot Barry Goldwater. Jimmy Carter signed the GI Bill, which granted WASP full military status. So it took them 33 years. So they were glad to get the benefits and be able to go to a VA hospital. But a lot of the men coming out of World War II could go to college and on the GI Bill. The WASPs weren't able to do that. I missed over one. This is just a Stars and Stripes magazine from that time. I'm trying to read it. Thursday, November 10th, 1977. WASP win 33 battle for vet status, 33-year battle. And they're getting recognition. In 2009, President Obama and the Congress awarded the WASP the Congressional Gold Medal. And that was a big deal. The lady on the left of the picture was Bee Haydu. She was a good friend of ours. And the lady on the far right is a Thunderbird pilot. She was, just instrumental in pushing for this too. So ultimately, they got the Congressional Gold Medal. And I have one of these. If you want to come up and look at it after the talk, it's really, really a special award. This is Dee Dee Parrish. She accepted the gold medal on behalf of the WASP in Washington, D.C. on March 9th, 2010. And here's a group of the WASP in attendance. They all got together to receive their medals. There's a picture of the medal in the bottom right with the front and the back. So let's see here. Here's a story about one of the WASPs.
Heroes. Occasionally, those heroes have to fight to keep their title. Betty Strophus is one of those heroes. Betty served as a Women's Air Force service pilot, known as WASPs, during World War II. She was relieved from duty when she and over 1,000 other WASPs were disbanded in December of 1944. Not one to back away from a fight, Betty fought to make the WASP story known to the public so they could get the recognition they deserved as the Army Air Force's first female pilots.
The congressmen, they took it under consideration. It took them a while, but they finally recognized us as pilots, as pilots and also as World War II pilots. And so we were recognized there. And we were all recognized as veterans at that time, and I'm very proud to be a veteran of the United States Air Force.
Mrs. Strophus took a stroll down memory lane when she returned to Nellis Air Force Base, known in her day as the Las Vegas Army Airfield, where she was stationed during the war. While touring Nellis, Betty met with members of the Thunderbirds, including their female pilot.
A day to remember. We were taken to see the Thunderbirds. I met 8 girls that were connected with the Thunderbirds in one way or another. I met the one girl who was flying with that Crown de Moore that was going to an air show down in Kansas. And I felt 10 feet tall to be with those people. That is what I wanted to do when I got out. I want to be one of those hot shots.
The tour continued with a trip to the Nellis Control Tower. More than 60 years have passed since Betty last visited Nellis Air Force Base, and though much has changed, she still remembers it vividly.
It is no longer Las Vegas Army Airfield, it is Nellis Field now, and it's a beautiful field, and it's really brought up to date. I am so proud of what they've done with this beautiful base. And I'm so proud to see all the people who are in the military who are doing what they're doing here today. I am just so proud of them all. They are all my heroes.
The afternoon concluded with a special presentation of the Distinguished Diamondback Award to Ms. Strophus for her time in service.
So you are the second recipient of the Diamondback Award from the 99th Air Base Wing. I cannot think of a more deserving person. You buck up, hang tight, there you go. Okay, there'll be no crying. There's no crying in the Air Force, you got it? All right.
Though her visit to Nellis was brief, Ms. Strophus said she will cherish it forever.
So proud to be here. And I love it, Nellis Air Force Base. I just hope I come back sometime.
At 93 years old, Betty Strophus proves that a true hero continues to fight for what's right, long after others have stepped up to do the same. Airman First Class Aaron Hauser, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada.
Here's a picture of Betty as a WASP. We got to know Betty from going to air shows. She was just so fun to be around, so animated. When she's talking, the hands are going like this. But one of the stories she told, an F-16 came into her hometown and offered her a ride. Now, she was obviously later in life, and she says, "Are you kidding? Of course I want to go for a ride." So she came out the next day, and they put the G suit on her that keeps the blood from rushing down into your lower levels if you get into a steep G turn. Well, she got up, and she was talking about flying the AT-6, had a big stick, and it was heavy. Said she got in this F-16, that little stick like a joystick on a video game, and the pilot told her, "You can fly this once we get up to altitude." So she said she pulled that stick back and went like that, so the plane shot up on its side, and the G suit popped out. The pilot said, "We only have one bag if somebody gets sick." She said, "I don't need it, you hang on to it." I mean, she took a shot at him in his own airplane. That was Betty. You just love to be around. I get choked up talking. I mean, she's just a special lady. This was another battle. In 2015, the Army decided they should no longer allow the WASPs to be buried in Arlington. And it's just, what a shame. You know, I researched that. It kind of made me mad. It said they're going to run out of space in 70 years. And I think, now the wife of a veteran can be buried there, but here's these veterans now that won the Congressional Gold Medal, and they were denied burial rights in Arlington. So I don't know how they come up with this, but a lot of WASPs were frustrated. We went on an honor flight with my wife and a WASP and another veteran from here in Marco, and this was when this was going on. The WASP that was with us didn't want to ride through the cemetery. She said, "This is just wrong." Here we are later in life still fighting battles. So they get this turned around. This is Elaine Harmon. She was a P-51 pilot, and after her death, her granddaughter, that was an attorney, she pushed hard, Facebook, and had it tattooed on her arm, this House bill, just to push to get them buried. Eventually, they overturned that, and now the WASPs are allowed to be buried in Arlington. But for many of them, they want to be buried in their hometown near their loved ones rather than Arlington. So maybe there's 5 or 10 buried there. I don't know. There's not a lot. But it's for the Army to push back like that. I don't understand it. To me, now this starts getting more personal. This is a P-51. To me, this was one of the prettiest airplanes of the World War II. But this fellow brought his plane up from Texas, and he was giving rides to any World War II veteran. So, of course, the WASP, man, they all still love to fly. They all got a ride in this P-51 that wanted one. Here's a picture of one of the WASPs. She was from Ohio. You can see the smile on her face. She still loves to fly. They all did. You get them near an airplane, they'd line up to go for a ride. Here's a picture of my mother. She was in class 43. That means the 7th class of 1943. She was inducted into the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame in 1999 after her death. So here's one of her ID cards as a WASP. Here's her discharge papers, yes. This is one I always laugh about. When we were studying World War II in school, Grandma, and I think it's about time you and I had a talk about how you flew a Douglas Dauntless dive bomber for the Navy. I said, yes, that was my mother. It's hard to think of her. When I got my pilot's license, the first person I wanted to take for a ride was my mother, and I thought, I was so proud, you know, to get her on the plane. But, you know, when you're 20-something, you think, here she is 50. She still had it, man. She was good. And when you take another pilot for a ride, they know. I mean, they know if you're on top of your game. It's just like if you ride with somebody in the car. You know if they're a good driver, you don't want to ride with them anymore. Much the same with flying. I went to the Air Force Museum in Dayton and went over to the Tuskegee Airmen exhibit, and they had a nice display with their Congressional Gold Medals, and there was none at the WASP display. So I contacted the museum and said, hey, come on, guys. You know, you've got the gold medal for the Tuskegee Airmen. How come the WASP medal isn't on display? They said, well, we don't have one. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my mother's. They said, we won't guarantee that we'll put it up. But they did. That's the display at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Sure makes me as a son proud. There's my mother's picture at the Air Force Museum. She's on the left. There's another WASP on the right. Another family member gave a WASP to the museum. This way they could show the front and back of the medal. If you want to know a little more about the WASP, there's NPR did, it's about a 10-minute segment called Fly Girls. And they put my mother's picture on their website. So that's her on the left, and it certainly makes the son proud to see his mother's picture in something like that. This was Vi Cowden. She was such a neat lady. She flew P-51s, which is a heavy warbird, and they're not easy to fly. A lot of horsepower. You don't push the throttle in right away, the plane will flip over. So you really had to learn to fly these planes, but she was just a little wisp of a thing. She had trouble getting up to 100 pounds to meet the 100-pound minimum to be a WASP. So anyhow, if you're interested, Amazon Prime had this. There's Vi later in life, and we got to know her at air shows and spent time with her and her husband and having dinner with them. But they did a special here called Wings of Silver. You can watch that on Amazon. I think it's $2 or $3, but it's a good story. It's really a motivational story and tells a little about their life and how she got started with it. Here's a picture of Vi when she was getting ready to parachute at age 89. Yeah, how many people do that at 89? This is Marty Wall. Marty and my mother were good friends. She's a special lady. She lived in Indiana. I stopped and visit with her, and at one point, she had family visiting. The WASP would always go to the big air show in Oshkosh. Well, she had family visiting that week. And I told her, look, if your family leaves, you give me a call, I'll come down and get you. So I did. I flew down to Indiana and picked her up and flew her to Oshkosh. But what a privilege for me to have a WASP fly with me in my plane. Here's a picture of Marty and I at the air show. That plane in the background is a Stearman, and that's one that they trained in actually in Sweetwater, Texas. And a fellow brought this back to life and restored it, and he's won prizes at Oshkosh for the restoration. But that's Marty and I. Here's another picture of Marty after she got a ride in the P-51. And what a great guy to come in there and give rides to these veterans. Well, you can see the smile on her face as she just got out from getting that ride. Here was a picture of Marty in my plane going to Oshkosh. And again, they know, man, if you're not on top of your game, it's like, This fellow was from here in Naples, Bill McLarence. He also flew P-51s in combat over Germany. And this is at the air show in Oshkosh with two of the WASP. And I think they flirted with each other a little bit. I made the comment that we've stayed in the same place at the end of the night. I told Bill, I don't want to hear that you were chasing the WASP down the hall last night. And surely the lady on the left in the picture said, if he's chasing me down the hall, I'm going to slow down a little. So, yeah, they never lost their sense of humor. Here's a picture of three of the WASP at the air show in Oshkosh. Again, they were like rock stars. People wanted to meet them and shake their hands and talk to them. So they were, unfortunately, there's probably less than 5 left, if there are that many today. But like all the World War II veterans, there's just not a lot of them. Here's Betty Strophus again. She got to fly back to her hometown with the crew in this B-25. This was from Oshkosh. And the WASP, you can see them in their white shirts. They had a lot of young females interested in becoming pilots at Oshkosh. So this was a chance for these females to meet the WASP. This was also a privilege. This was Oshkosh, where we stayed. It was fun. We'd go down at the end of the day. There was a lake where we stayed, and they'd go down with their cheese and crackers and tell stories and have a glass of wine. And so there's 4 of the WASP up here at that air show. And the 2 ladies in the background are fighter pilots. So they The fact that one on the left is Heather Penny. On 9/11, they sent up 2 jets to try to bring down that airliner over Pennsylvania. She was the pilot of one of those airliners, or pilot of one of the fighters to bring down the airliners. And she was tasked. They didn't have ammo on the plane. I said, well, how are you going to bring it down? They were going to ram it. They were going to give their life for our country. And I said, couldn't you parachute when you got close? And she said, no, if we parachuted and missed it, that plane was going to go into D.C. and kill people. So I thought, what a hero. Shootsy lived near me. I got to know Shootsy after my mother passed. She was running the stores for the WASP. And I think when I found out she was doing that, I went down to meet Shootsy. I probably bought one of everything she had. And she never had children, and her husband had passed. So we really got to be friends. We did a lot together. I started trimming her shrubs, or we'd go to lunch. And here's a picture of Shootsy later in life. I think most of them could still wear their uniforms. You know, they were very disciplined. Here's a picture of Shootsy at Oshkosh in that same P-51. But she got a ride, and the pilot said, what kind of ride do you want? You want to do a sightseeing ride? Do you want to do some mild aerobatics? She said, no, I want to do hard aerobatics. She said for a half hour they did loops and rolls and spins. So yeah, here she is, late 80s. There's a picture of Shootsy. We flew a lot together. We got to go to several air shows and events. I actually named my airplane Shootsy in her honor. I thought that was a good name for a little airplane. There's a picture of Shootsy with the airplane. Here we are going to Sweetwater for a WASP reunion, and the pilot and the co-pilot of the airliner came out to meet her, and then they made an announcement that we had a VIP on board, so that was pretty special. Here she was arriving at Dallas. They were met by an honor guard, so it's such a privilege to travel with them. This is the same airliner. The flight attendants wanted to meet her, and so there's a picture of Shootsy with the flight attendants, and this was a TSA or security at the airport. He wanted to meet her, so a lot of people really went out of their way to meet these WASPs. This is special. This is the same lady you just saw in the film with Betty Strophus, the Thunderbird pilot. If you notice the bracelet on her wrist, it's the WASP wings. Shootsy made those and gave those to Carolyn, and she wore them. In fact, if you look at this ring that I have on, Shootsy was a silversmith, and I made this ring with Shootsy, so I wear it with pride. It's just something special to me. But there's a picture of Carolyn. Her call sign was Blaze, but flying the F-16s. Here they are at Oshkosh. That's Blaze on the left with Shootsy, and the lady on the right is the same pilot that flew the F-16 on 9/11 to try to bring down that airliner. The plane on the right is called a Breezy, and there's no fuselage around it. And I got a ride in that. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I don't like heights. And oh yeah. Boy, to look over the edge of a building, I don't like to do that. But here you are sitting on what looks like a lawn chair out in this airplane. But the WASP were lined up to get a ride in that airplane, so they still love to fly. Here's the WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. Again, if you ever get a chance to go to West Texas, it's really a nice museum. You should stop and visit there. The picture on the right is just like the photograph we saw earlier of heading home. They've done the silhouette there between the two hangars. So it's really a nice museum. Here's a picture of my wife, Pat, who's here in the front row. Put your hand up, Pat. And we had the chance to take these two veterans. Pat escorted Shootsy, and I escorted Jack Babb. He's in the next picture. Jack was a P-51 pilot, lived in Marco. He just passed away about a year ago. He lived to be 99. He was almost 100. But if you ever get a chance to go on an honor flight, go. It makes you proud to be an American. Just the greeting and the buses to get us here, and just so special. It was a whole day event. We left late night, got home about midnight the next day, so it was a 24-hour day. One of the nice things that I really liked about it as a guardian, it was your task to go to neighbors of the veterans or friends or relatives and get a card to thank you, Grandpa, or whatever. So they put all these into an envelope, And on the way back from D.C., they passed these out. They called it mail call. So here's one for Shootsy. They'd open these envelopes and read all these cards. Well, you never saw so many tears. Just pulled at your heartstrings. There's Jack. Again, maybe some of you know him. He's from Marco Island, Jack Babb. And there's Shootsy on the left and my wife and I going on this honor flight. This is Margaret Ringenberg. When I first met Margaret, she had just finished a race. Came down the next day. This was on a weekend. Sunday, she flew back to the States. The Powder Puff race was from England to, I'm not even sure where. But the next day, she's down in South Florida signing books. So, I mean, they just went. So she completed the round the world air race at 94 at age 77. In March 21 at 79, she flew a race from London to Sydney. I mean, it's amazing at this age to be doing that. Tom Brokaw devoted a chapter to his book, The Greatest Generation, to Margaret, and that's a story too. They called her to do an interview with Margaret, and she wouldn't return their phone call. She thought it was the church pulling a prank on her, and she wasn't going to return this prank call. There's a book that she wrote about girls can't be pilots. And this book on the left is really a good book. It's out of print now, but it's got a picture of each WASP, and it's more like a coffee table book. It's a big book. The one on the right, we saw that picture of B. Haydu earlier getting the gold medal next to President Obama. So they're excellent books. This last book is available from the library, The Women with Silver Wings. It's really a good story. The author that wrote it is a professor at Texas Women University. She did her master's on the WASP. So if you ever want to learn more about the WASP, you could read that book. Might even be a good book for a book club, but anyhow, that's it. Any questions?
Are there questions of John?
Questions? Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but I can tell you that I was a guardian for the honor flight for a neighbor.
Aw.
And took them to all over Washington.
Yes.
We left out of Green Bay, and of course, Gerald Green Bay weather. We had to get the ice and before we could take off, and of course that put us behind. Well, you've only got so much time to get down there and to go to the museum and go to the honor areas and all that.
Sure.
But they prioritized us to flight through, and we passed everybody to get down. You land in D.C. and they beat you with fireboats. Now, don't beat
Yes.
the firemen. That really tugged on my heart.
Oh.
To go underneath that water spray that they put there as an honor to these guys. And you're right about mail call coming back, when you start handing out these packets of mail from all the neighbors and the friends and everything. These guys, I choke up.
Oh, I do too. Me too. I'm the same way. It's really special. Makes you proud to be an American, and we owe so much to our veterans. Yes, sir.
I also got to be a guardian on an honor flight.
What'd you think of it?
I told people that it was my honor to be with those people, those men and women. They were amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a very proud day for me.
Me too.
My veteran has passed. He was in the Korean War. But when we were there at the Korean site, he had on his hat and some stuff that identified that he had been in the Korean War, and a Korean soldier came over to him, and they saluted and they did a little march together, and
Aww.
he thanked him for
How special.
what he did for his country.
Sure.
And Jack and his son went on the same flight, and I picked them up here at the church and took them to Naples with the guy that I picked up in Naples. And it was quite a day.
Oh, a special, special day. Yeah, you can't describe it if you haven't done it. Just, if you ever get a chance, at the end of the honor flight, when they land back in Fort Myers, there's just a crowd of people. They're all the way through the airport, all the way out in the parking lot, saluting the veterans. there'll be Girl Scouts, there's military, there's bands, you know, it's just people saluting. I'm sure that was your experience too.
Yeah, there's 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids there.
Yeah.
Saluting them and thanking
Oh,
them.
just so special. Yeah, it's really special.
It was amazing.
Well, and you all can do that. You know, go online and find out when Naples is doing their next honor flight, find out when they're coming in, go to the airport, and you can be there, be part of that. It's so patriotic, and there could be 1,000 people there, and it's wonderful, and we're talking 10 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But do it. Go and immerse yourself into that experience. It's just absolutely wonderful.
All the veterans had a wheelchair. We pushed the veterans in a wheelchair. So everybody, and a lot of them, like Shootsy, I don't need a wheelchair. Well, after 3 or 4 hours, she was glad to have it, to have somebody be able to push her around rather than walking all over D.C. But yeah, I can't say enough about the honor flight. So they flew out of Fort Myers. It was a nonstop flight to D.C. and there was bands on the ground to meet us when we arrived. There was food and, you know, just special. Everything about it.
All decorated.
Yes.
Flags.
Oh, there's a video out there called Honor Flight, and I first saw this on Amazon. You can probably rent it for $2 or $3, but it gives you a little history of Honor Flight, where it started and how it got moving. But it's started out and it just snowballed. So glad to see that. We owe so much to our veterans. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Appreciate you coming out. Thank you.
Thank you again, John and Pat, for being here. And you're welcome to come. We're always the second Monday of every month, so love to have you. Before we dismiss, I do have one correction that just was shared with me. Priscilla Penn's funeral is next Monday at 11, not noon, as was previously announced, so 11 a.m. Okay? All right. Well, I think unless there's anything else, we're adjourned until